Alright, so frankly, we're 4 episodes into Peacemaker Season 2, and I can't be the only one who's noticed that it's going a bit slowly, right? Not a lot has happened. Well, that's what I'll be talking about in this video, which will be my review and breakdown for Peacemaker Season 2, Episode 4, titled Need I Say Door. Make sure to subscribe and become a member of this channel in the Noble tier or above for early access to videos, and in the King tier for a special shout out. Thanks to these members for the extra support. Beginning with what we learned about the DCU, it's not very much. Everything we learned was about Peacemaker, his father, the QUC, or references to events from previous DCU entries. This episode's cold open flashback jumps way further back from previous entries to 35 years ago, the year 1990, far enough removed from the 2022 to 2025 timeframe that the flashbacks have gone over so far that I won't bother fitting it into the timeline. Clearly though, it was before Keith's death. In this scene, and then throughout the episode, we learn that Augie not only didn't create the QUC or the Peacemaker helmets, but he's also far from the genius we thought him to be, having flunked out of high school. The QUC at least was created by some sort of alien who Augie shot and then stole the key from. A key that looks suspiciously like the Peacemaker helmets. Likely, I think the Peacemaker helmets were visually inspired by that key. We later learned from Chris that the helmets weren't created by Augie. Gunn confirmed this won't be addressed in the season, but he has the reason in his head. I guess season 3 can focus on that if that's a thing that ever happens. There's a reference to a moment from season 1 that is now canon, Economos knocking out Judo Master, and there's a reference to Creature Commandos. Flag mentions defying Waller's orders in Pokolistan, and his back being broken by Clayface, neither of which needed to be canonized since Creature Commandos is, and always has been, entirely canon, but it's just cool that they're referencing these events. Like I said, we didn't learn much, but there's definitely more to talk about review-wise. I'm honestly beginning to take some issues with elements of the season that I think need to be addressed. Right off the bat, the opening scene. Generally speaking, the scene is great. It does a great job at quickly explaining where the QUC comes from, while showing a bit more of the dynamic that Chris grew up with. As a cold open, this one is good in a vacuum, and it really fits the episode as we are introduced to some sort of weird looking device that we later learn is the key to the QUC and the way through which the QUC is moved elsewhere, which then happens in the episode. Now, I get the idea that Augie didn't invent the QUC because that is a bit much. It's far more advanced than Lex Luthor's interdimensional tech, for instance, so I get it. It makes sense that maybe on some sort of adventure he came across the tech and stole it from some sort of alien or interdimensional being or whatever. What I don't understand is why they had to take it a step further and later confirm that he didn't just not invent the QUC, he also isn't a genius. He didn't invent the Peacemaker helmets or even the White Dragon suit. I mean, I'm assuming because he flunked out of 10th grade, how would he create the White Dragon suit? Honestly, I hate this change. I love the character of Augie Smith in season 1. He was such an interesting play on the redneck cliche because he is a mechanical genius, and I love the idea that Augie is a mechanical genius or a genius in general who just loved living like a redneck because he loves it, and he's racist because racism doesn't necessarily correlate to intelligence. There's a lot of really stupid people out there who refer to themselves as non-racists, and a lot of smart people who are actually racist, and vice versa. There isn't really much of a correlation. What this change does is that it makes him more of a cliche, dumb redneck, while also making it so that we now have a few plot holes we need to fix. We need explanations for everything. We have an explanation for the QUC, but it's a bit less believable that he just came across an alien and it's just a coincidence. If he was a genius and he had some sort of adventures already, it would have made more sense. We now need also an explanation for Peacemaker's helmets, the White Dragon suit, and then all of the same things on Earth 2, in addition to the Captain Triumph suit. This reveal needlessly changes a unique, different take on a tired cliche and turns it right back into a tired cliche, while then creating plot holes that need to be filled in. I don't understand what Gunn was thinking on this one. I don't understand why you can't just have the White Dragon be a genius and a racist. I mean, Lex Luthor is kind of the same thing, right? Just like a little bit less extreme in his racism and smarter. I don't know, it doesn't make any sense to me. I hated this change. Beyond the cold open, this episode generally feels a lot like episode 2 rather than episodes 1 and 3, which is to say that not a lot happens in the way of plot development, but things are set up for later episodes. This is fine and all. I think it will pay off for the season, but for this episode individually, like episode 2, it doesn't exactly make for the most engaging viewing experience or episode. In the Argus team's drive to Peacemaker's house, we get some great talking scenes that are generally really funny and entertaining, and it's here alongside the rest of the episode where we truly get to know Red Saint Wild. Michael Rooker is great in the role, he does a great job, and the character is funny, but he's also a bit silly, which is, I know, a weird complaint in a show full of characters like Peacemaker, Vigilante, Judo Master, and Lynx and Flurry, but that's just the thing. The Argus group, for instance, instance, that drove to Peacemaker's house. Already had one newly introduced silly character alongside a previously introduced silly character. They did not need a third one to add to this group. There's just enough of the silly characters on this show. I don't need another one. I would have much preferred for this character to be taken seriously so that he is then a serious rival to Eagly. I mean, that could be so interesting. That said, I did really like the final scene of him using his powers. I think visually they look great, the music here was fantastic, and I'm just hoping that once people notice that he has powers and he isn't talking out of his ass, they will take him more seriously, because that would be, I think, more interesting. Judo Master, meanwhile, was great. He has some funny lines, an exciting fight against Peacemaker, and in traditional fashion is knocked out yet again, only to then get back up again. I like this character. He just kinda keeps coming back, but I think more than anything, I love how he always wears his costume. I can't be the only one who's noticed this, right? That we're 4 episodes into this season and we've barely seen Peacemaker in his suit, and we have not seen Vigilante in his suit at all. This is in stark contrast to season 1, where Chris wore his suit whenever possible. Even in interviews, John Cena wore his suit whenever possible, while Adrian was nearly always seen in his suit, mostly even masked. I miss that feeling. In the comics, heroes rarely take off their suits. It does make sense that in a live action show, it wouldn't exactly need to be like that, but season 1 felt so much more like a comic book because the heroes wore their costumes whenever possible. The contrast to this season is palpable, and frankly, I'm kind of bored of seeing Chris Smith but not Peacemaker, and seeing Adrian Chase but not Vigilante. Chris and Adrian are great, but I'm here for Peacemaker and Vigilante. The episode puts heavy focus on John Economos and pulled it off pretty well. He was great, really coming through in a few clutch moments. Economos felt more capable and confident than ever before. He actually seems to have grown a little. We learned a bit about his backstory as well, and that paints him as being incredibly capable in his hacking skills, which is why he's had the job he's had, which generally makes a ton of sense. Economos was great in this episode and generally is the one character that I'm liking more than I did in season 1. We'll see if that stays true for the rest of the season. All that being said, this episode has 2 fantastic back-to-back moments which are easily the highlights of the episode, and they're 2 individual talking scenes, one between Flag and Harcourt, and the other between Chris and Leota. Flag finally joins the fray, having been mostly missing from the season so far. Hopefully he finally takes center stage from here, because the season has been missing a prime antagonist in my opinion. Flag and Harcourt's discussion is a great scene. You feel like they really know each other, having likely met at Junior's funeral. The shared loss between them is very noticeable. Flag then makes excellent points regarding how culpable Chris is in his son's murder, stating how he, his son, and Amelia all defied Waller's orders when she went too far, and frankly, he's completely right. In this scene, I kind of felt like I'm on his side and that Chris needs to be taken down. Honestly, if I were Flag, I'd be a lot angrier than he seems to be. Chris is to blame for Junior's murder, as is Amanda Waller. Harcourt then dumps her frustrations about being blacklisted, a rant that is incredibly well written and very well acted by Jennifer Holland. I love this scene since it entirely convinced me that Harcourt would want to join in on the hunt for Peacemaker despite how close they got. She kind of needs to, but also Flag made some good points that makes it sound like it's kind of the right thing to do as well. The immediate following scene is even better. Leota and Chris have a legit moral and philosophical discussion about Chris simply moving to Earth 2. Leota brings up a good point of how maybe the other world isn't exactly another world, but some sort of mental manifestation of someone's perfect life, which is, I think, a lot more interesting than if it is another world and it's like a Nazi universe or something. The grass is always greener argument comes up, and it's perfectly sound, except Chris's alternative is so terrible and getting so much worse that it's like he doesn't even have any grass. There's also the dilemma of how he killed his alternate self. Replacing him removes the grief of his alternate universe loved ones, so it kind of sounds like the right thing to do. In the middle of all of this is the funniest moment of the episode, as Leota says, "Rick Flag Jr. is in love with you," before going back to an excellently written moral and even philosophical debate. I love the cosmic occurrence mentioned since that's legitimately so fitting for a DC universe. These 2 back-to-back scenes were so excellently written and acted that it saved an otherwise subpar, slow, and frankly really short episode. So as mentioned, this episode is very similar to episode 2, being a bit slow and not advancing the plot much, but doing a good amount of setup towards the rest of the season. I didn't like the Augie Smith change at all. In fact, I hated it. I didn't love most of what they did with Red Saying Wild. The episode is a little short, and I am getting a little sick of how slow the season is moving and how little we are seeing the superhero costumes. I'm just hoping that the second half of the season is a lot more exciting than the first. All that said, this episode is generally entertaining and funny, Economos and Judo Master are great, and there are two incredible back-to-back scenes that genuinely save the episode. Without them, I would have given this episode like a 6, but I'll give it another 7 out of 10 like episode 2, which is a bit disappointing since I did say in my episode 2 review that I doubt any episode going forward will be below an 8. Hopefully now that will be true. Thanks for watching.